ไม่ได้เสิร์ฟ
Right. Sorry about that, those on I was muted the whole time. Right, but I'll just go through back the answers. For number one, it was 2 and 3, so C. Number two, it was 1 and 2, that was A. Number three was carbon dioxide availability, so D. And the most recent one we did was number 4, and the answer for that was 1. Right, so number 5, Jana, you know the answer for number 5. You could just put which one you think is the answer in the chat for number 5. Which of the stages would involve decarboxylation? Those online, can you all hear me now? I was muted all the time, but you have to let me know if you hear me now. Okay. All right, well, I'll do number 5, right? Jenna, can you hear me? Emily, say yeah. Okay, right? So yeah, for number 5, the answer would be 2 only, right? So when you're going from pyruvate to ethanol, it will involve decarboxylation, which means it's losing a carbon or losing a carbon molecule or atom. Sorry, no molecule. Right. Okay, John, you can help us out with 6, right? Which of the following combination list the chemical groupings found in the ATP molecule? So in other words, what is an ATP molecule made up of? Right, so is it A, B, C, or D? Right, so Jana says T. Okay, so these amino acid, nitrogen base, and phosphate group. Okay, so let me go through it, right? The first answer is amino acid, sugar, and phosphate group. Now, one of these here not present in a adenosine triphosphate, right? Adenosine triphosphate doesn't have an amino acid. So A and D should immediately be eliminated. Okay, right? So like go on to B and C. So nitrogen base, that's correct. Adenosine triphosphate does have a nitrogen base. It does have a phosphate group. That's the obvious part. Right? Now, does it contain a sugar or protein? Adenosine triphosphate. Think about where it comes from. A sugar, right? You use glucose to make it. So it would have a sugar. Guess the answer for 6 would be B. Right. 7, you have the following experiment. Potassium hydroxide solution plus water. Right, to equal the volume of the seeds in the other test tube, you have a capillary U-tube with colored oil, and then you have a syringe, a plastic or metal cage containing germinating seeds, and filter paper to form a. So you have a potassium hydroxide solution. Right. So Emily can help us with this one. After 30 minutes, the fluid in the manometer would most likely. So you could take your time, Emily. What do you think would happen after 30 minutes to the fluid? So just remember, Actually, wait, no, let's scratch this question from this here. So leave out 7. Right? Had an error in this question, I just can't remember where it was. So you can leave out that. So Emily, do 8 instead. Which of the following pairs of statements correctly distinguishes between energy flow and nutrient cycling in ecosystems? Right, so the only difference between energy flow and energy cycling. So I think it's A, B, C, or D. Okay, B. Okay, so that's a good try, right? Very good try. So B is driven by photosynthesis, and for energy flow and nutrient cycling is driven by respiration. So the answer is actually A, right? So the reason it's wrong, the energy flow part not wrong. Energy flow is driven by photosynthesis, by producers. The problem is with the nutrient cycling one. It's not really driven by respiration. Okay, so that's the part that would have been wrong. C would have been wrong because they have it. It's the same thing they had in B, it's just the wrong side. So it's wrong. So it's really between E and D, right? So energy flow, does it occur through an ecosystem? Or does it occur within an ecosystem? It would occur through the ecosystem, right? The nutrient cycling would occur within an ecosystem. So for this one, it'll just be E. Right. Number 9, you have an experimental setup. So germinating peas with dry cotton and absorbent cotton soaked with potassium hydroxide. And the next one, you have dry peas and some beets. A possible reason for setting up the apparatus 2 is for what reason? So we're starting back with Jizzy. Why did they set up a second piece of practice? So the diagram with the answers. B, to compare the amount of carbon dioxide. Right, so it's not D, because you're not measuring the amount of carbon dioxide, evolved by dry peas. No, it says not D. Right? Yeah, to be C, right? So, well, it's not A as well, because you're not controlling any amount of oxygen. Right? The only difference between these two tubes, right, is, well, first of all, you have germinating peas and you have dry peas. It has one difference. And then you have some beets. What's the difference between germinating peas and dry peas? Germinating peas, they use oxygen, right, for respiration. Dry peas, they're not using any oxygen or carbon dioxide, right? So what you're really doing is verifying that oxygen gas is being consumed, right? Because only the number 1 is supposed to be using oxygen. Right, so we see. Number 10, Sanjeev, which of the following processes occur in the Calvin cycle? Zoom. Which of these processes would occur in the Calvin cycle? So D is the reduction of NADP and the regeneration of RUBP.
When we're talking, right?
Which one? A, B, C, or D? So yeah, well, that's a good thing you said it. It's supposed to be production of ATP in one of them, right? So it's either A or C. Now, is carbon dioxide fixed or is NADPH oxidized? That's the question. Actually, no. It'll be B. So, yeah, sorry, there's no production by ATP, it's the Calvin cycle. Mix it up, right? So yeah, it'll be B, fixation of carbon dioxide and regeneration of RUBP, right? So this is for photosynthesis, yeah. So BP.
Eight.
8?
Yeah.
Which one was it? 8 was A. Right, so 10 would be B, right? Fixation of carbon dioxide and regeneration of ribulose biphosphates. Right, 11, Atilia. Which of the following represents limitations of using pyramids of energy to describe relationship between trophic levels in an ecosystem? D or tree? Yeah, right. So a single grass plant has the same status as a tree. That's true. That's a limitation, even though they have different amounts of energy. Right? It requires the combustion of representative samples, which may be time consuming. Yep. It may be difficult to assign a species to one trophic level, for example, omnivores, say poultry, right? Right, Abhilasha 12, which of the following is not a conservation method to maintain biodiversity? A, spring bank. No, it wouldn't be. It's A, right? So I got you. Huh? Yeah, right? Okay. So remember, biodiversity is like, well, I should ask you, what is biodiversity? The different amount of organisms in a certain area, right? Different species of organisms in a certain area. So with a sperm bank now, it's similar to a seed bank, right? In case the organism goes extinct, you have genetic information on it to just not make another version, but just make new species. So a sperm bank is useful in that way, right? A botanic garden, right? If you maintain a botanic garden, it's protected. Okay, so you could ensure the species survive. Protected reserve, same thing as a botanic garden. Now, genetic engineering, is that conserving or is that coming up with new is new change, right? Is a new species. So that one would not be conservation. Okay. Right. So we're back to journal. Right. 13 mitochondria in muscles have more crystallate than mitochondria in skin cells. What is the significance of this? Right, so journal, do you think it's A, B, C, or D? A, right? More ATP is for ATP. Yeah, now be the answer, right? More ATP is for ATP production. Now, if you have more crystal, that means you have more folds, right? If you have more folds, then that means you have more surface area for the ATP is stored, right? So more ATP is for more ATP production. Increased surface area for absorption. That's also option 2. But I think the more correct one is E. Right? Because remember, okay, even if you have a small surface area, ATP production could still occur. If you don't have ATPs, or if you have a very little amount, ATP production will struggle. So the more correct answer is E. That's another thing with these multiple choice questions, right? Yeah, 2 answers could be correct, but you have a more correct one, right? Right, 14, Emily, which of the following action does not explain how deforestation might increase the risk of flooding? Right, so again, does not explain. These soil nutrients are lost through leaching. Yeah, that's correct, right? So the soil nutrients have nothing to do with flooding, right? It's leaching, yes, but that doesn't have a direct effect on flooding. So the answer for 14 would be D. Right, 15, right? So Jazeel started and she'll end. Which of the following contributes to the stability of an ecosystem? Sustainable. Yeah, correct. All the others will not sustain an ecosystem. Right? Okay.
Oh, it's true. Yeah, very good. The answer. Come back with the next case of second difference.
No, I never.
But let's always keep that answer on the like when these cases letters, that's why the 13, so
And 14 as well. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, 13, it is spaced out, but A is the correct answer.
they're not always.
Yeah. I guess if you use as an don't use as an indicator, take that one. Because if you look at, I think it's sometimes, it's just a coincidence, because look at number 9 as well.
It's about one.
Yeah, but so you want to get 60%. Hmm?
I'll go with the three.
Just use it as an indicator. Don't use it as for sure. So. Yeah. But it's multiple choice, so you really shouldn't run out of time. Okay, right, so we just do the first 15 because that's module 1, right? Actually, I see which others we could, because so many topics we covered. Yeah, we could do 16, 18, 19. We'll do up to 21, right?
I have a first question and funny.
Okay. Okay, so actually we just do one more round and that's it. So everybody will get one more chance and that's it. Right, so Sanjay, for 16, the active uptake of many ions occurs at the roots of green plants. If the respiratory enzymes of the roots of a plant are poisoned, at which of the following tissues of the roots would movement of ions be totally stopped? Right, so remember the key part here is the roots, the respiratory enzymes. Respiratory enzymes of the roots are poisoned. Endodermis, right? So this one, the easiest thing to do is use elimination. Xylem and the cortex parenchyma have nothing to do with respiration. The xylem is for water transport. The cortex parenchyma also allows water to pass through it, right? To eventually reach the Casparian strip and then go up the xylem. So it's between the epidermis and the endodermis. Remember, the epidermis is the outermost layer. Again, nothing to do with respiration, right? Respiratory enzymes would most likely be found in the endodermis. If it's affecting respiration, it would affect the endodermis. Okay, so 16 would be C. Is that spaced out? Not. Okay, 17. Actually, capillarity is one of the methods by which water ascends xylem vessels. This is facilitated by xylem vessels, which of these features here helps with capillarity in particular? A narrow, yeah. So 17 would be D. Okay. 18, right, so back to journal. Which of the labeled structures above is responsible for the provision of nutrients to the sieve tube element? So 1, 2, 3, or 4, which one of them gives nutrients to the sieve tube element? Oh. A. So that's correct, right? So the A is the companion cell, right? So nutrients from the companion cells would move across into the sieve tube element, right? Is that an active or is that a passive process? So that loading of nutrients from the companion cell into the sieve tube element, is that active or passive process? Is ATP used? Yeah, ATP is used, right? So it's an active process, right? And the name of it is active loading. Active loading. Right, so 19 is Emily. Yeah, right? So companion cells are connected to sieve tube elements by, which one of these connect the companion cell to sieve tube elements? C, plasmodesmata, that's correct. Right, so 19 would be 19 would be C. Okay, since Ariana joined us, we'll do one more. And Ariana will help us with this one. Yeah, I don't want to feel left, so she gave her 2. Right, so Ariana, Abhilasha convinced me to give you 2 questions to try, right? Okay, yeah, it's all Abhilasha fault, just remember that. Right, okay, so item 20 refers to the following diagram, which is a representation of an electron micrograph of a transverse section of cells in the phloem tissue of a stem of a plant, right? The cell labeled 1 is what? So again, it's phloem tissue, so most likely the cell labeled 1 would be what? B, the companion cell, yep, so that's correct, right? So 20 is the companion cell. And I, yep. Oh no. Yeah, right. So 2 is the companion cell. So the cell label 1 is not the companion cell, it is the sieve tube element. That's it. So we recognize that, remember, the sieve tube element is mostly hollow, right? It might have 1 or 2 mitochondria in there, but other than that, it'll be hollow or empty. Right? The companion cell would have most of the organs, like the nucleus, mitochondria, ribosomes, things like that. Right? Okay, right? So Ariana, one more. A pulse is due to which one of these? Ventricular systole, ventricular diastole, arterial systole, or arterial diastole. Ventricular systole, that's correct, right? So remember, ventricular systole is the contraction of the ventricles. And your ventricles in your heart are much thicker, so it produces a much greater force. So that pulse you have is due to the ventricular systole, right? That beat is from ventricular systole. One more. Right, since you're doing so good, Ariana, we'll give you one more. Right? Yeah, I was convinced by it. Right? Okay, 23. In anaerobic respiration, pyruvate does not enter the Krebs cycle, but instead undergoes fermentation. Which of the following is not a possible product of this process? So which one of these is not produced from anaerobic respiration? Okay, so you have the right idea, right? So it'll be D, reduce NAD. So remember, these reduced NADs eventually later on enter the electron transport chain. We do have that in anaerobic respiration. Okay, so it's impossible in anaerobic respiration to reduce NAD. So the answer for 23 would be D, reduce NAD. Right? Okay, so we stop there with the multiple choice. Right, but you all can see we're supposed to be able to do about half of a multiple choice paper by now. Even some of the other questions and the topics we didn't do as yet, especially the last 10, we should kind of have an idea how to do it. But we will do it today. So today, we're going to continue with transport. And we're doing the cardiac output. Okay, and the cardiac output is made up of two things, right? It's comprised of stroke volume. Stroke volume. And arteries. So these two factors impact the cardiac output. Right, so stroke volume simply refers to the volume of blood produced per stroke or per beat of the heart. Your heart rate is the amount of beats of the heart per minute. Right, don't have a difference, it's not the same thing. This is a measure of volume per beat. This is a volume of beats per minute. Right, so it's going to be units for them. That should help you all remember. So heart rate is beats. I'll put some of this also. Beats per minute. And the stroke volume. If it's milligrams, if it's milligrams per beat. So if you all remember the units that measure them, you should be able to remember the definition. Right? And both of them is the cardiac output.
That's what you tried.
Well,
Sorry.
is P never seen the physics before. Milligrams per beat. What's the other than to be? We're going down the. Just use weeds, that's like that.
Well, that does.
Huh?
Wait, what?
Alright, just don't use weeds, that's that. Letters. Okay, so yeah, the cardiac output would be influenced by these two factors. Right now, these factors are influenced by other things as well. Right? The first one. So stroke volume on your heart rate. More in particular, your heart rate will be influenced by oxygen concentration. Okay. So let's say, for example, right, if you're exercising, how the oxygen concentration is in your blood? Will it have a high oxygen concentration or low oxygen concentration? It have a low oxygen concentration, right? So what would happen is, because of that low oxygen concentration, your heart actually starts to beat fast. Okay, if you all experience that when you all exercise or when you do any type of physical activity, your heart starts to beat faster. The reason for that is your body trying to cycle the blood faster to try to get the oxygenated blood to your heart, oxygen into it in your lungs. It's quite about control. That's what's happening here. Now, the chemistry behind it, when the blood have a low oxygen level, they send some signals in the blood vessels, right? They release something called nitric acid. That nitric acid indicates to the body, oh, well, oxygen low in concentration, so the blood vessels need to dilate. Right? Dilate means it expands. When the blood vessels expand, more blood can enter the heart. Right? More blood enters the heart, they have a higher stroke volume, or more volume entering the heart, so more volume could leave the heart. Okay, so oxygen concentration affects this, as well as the carbon dioxide concentration. Right, so another thing you all will have completely before is adrenaline. Right, so adrenaline, what's what adrenaline? It's your heart rate. So you increase it, right? And if you increase the heart rate, you're going to increase the cardiac output. Okay, now adrenaline is a hormone, right? Once it's secreted into the bloodstream, it will interact with chemoreceptors or chemical receptors, will indicate to the body for some reason or another you need more oxygen, you need more energy. And if you need more energy, you need more oxygen for respiration. So your blood will start to cycle faster. You decided it. And these two you will be functions. They are para sympathetic nerves and sympathetic nerves. And parasympathetic, also known as vagus. So nitric acid or nitric oxide? You remember? Or is it nitric oxide? Right. So it's supposed to be nitric oxide. Right, so these are the four main factors that affect the cardiac movement. Okay? Okay. So let's take a look for each one of them. It's a short one. Right, so the first one is for oxygen and carbon dioxide concentration. And oxygen efficiency in cells. Oxygen efficiency in cells. Can result in oxygen efficiency in cells can result in the release of nitric oxide and result in the release of nitric oxide which dilates the arterioles. Dilates the arterioles, allowing for increased blood flow. Which dilates the arterioles, allowing for increased blood flow. And cardiac output. And cardiac output. Good stuff. And next one is adrenaline. Adrenaline. This is a hormone. This is a hormone. Which stimulates. This is a hormone which stimulates adrenal receptors. Which in turn stimulates the SAN and ABN, which in turn stimulates the SAN and the ABN. Full stop. Now for the parasympathetic. Spell it wrong. Parasympathetic. Sympathetic. Sympathetic. Sure, but it's not English, but you have to be able to spell it. I just have to be able to see it. I was seeing it. Oh, my days for writing done, you know. And the lucky I was right on the board.
Nobody can't, you didn't even say it, it was saying sympathetic.
Well, that's how my brain was interpreting it. I don't understand how that's. I don't understand how that's dyslexia. That's why she intimidated. She mean. Okay, so the parasympathetic nerves. Sympathetic. Yeah, because I still don't understand what is dyslexia. No, but I don't write the wrong side.
Yeah. Wrong, right, the wrong side.
No, I write it like this. I write it instead of writing like that, but I write it like this. That is dyslexia. Huh? That is what dyslexia is. No, dyslexia is like when you mix something. No, certain letters. You have dyslexia?
Actually, I'm glad that because I feel like those mix up times.
No, that's just your personality. That's not a disease. Okay. Right, so parasympathetic nerves. During strenuous activity, arteries in the brain may swell. Arteries in the brain may swell. Which triggers baroreceptors. Okay. In brackets, stretch, which triggers baroreceptors in brackets, stretch. So just stretch receptors, right? So because these arteries swelling, the baroreceptors they're gonna figure that out. They're gonna realize that. Right? In brackets, stretch, those brackets, comma, which signals along the vagus nerve. Which signals along the vagus nerve. Along the vagus nerve. To lower cardiac output. Right? Next, if you all have a space next to or on top of parasympathetic nerves, just put high pressure. So this occurs when you have high pressure in the body. Right, so you're trying to reduce the pressure. Right, now for sympathetic nerves. Right, sympathetic nerves in brackets, low pressure. Low pressure. When the baroreceptors are not stimulated, when the baroreceptors are not stimulated, comma, when the baroreceptors are not stimulated, comma, impulses are sent along the sympathetic nerve. Impulses are sent along the sympathetic nerve. Which increase cardiac output. As well as blood pressure. Which increases cardiac output as well as blood pressure. Full stop. Okay. Right? So we all know, like if you're all sitting for a while and you suddenly stand up, you always ever get dizzy. So now you all know why, right? Or should have an idea why. It's because your blood, it needs to flow properly. And so it needs time to adapt to changes. Right? So if your cardiac output low, you're sitting down, you're not stressed, your body not really exerting any energy, you have a low blood pressure. If you stand up suddenly, it'll take a while for the blood to reach your head, or enough blood to go to your head. Because standing up technically is a form of exercise. Right? Okay. So those are factors that affect the cardiac output. Now, what are some factors that would affect blood pressure? Again, cardiac output and blood pressure are two different things. So what are some things that would affect your blood pressure? So your diet, good. What? So there are four main ones we need to know for the syllabus. Diet is a big one. Anybody? Exercise, right? So your diet would affect your blood pressure. Exercise would affect blood pressure. What? So when all your parents is probably always say you stand up, no blood pressure, stress level, right? So like we physical or emotional stress, and one more. There's this one linked with respiration and lung disease. Smoking, right? So remember smoking would yeah, so Emily said, right? Smoking. So that would affect the thickness and the elasticity of your blood vessels, which would in turn affect your blood pressure, right? So just take down the factors, right? I'm not going into detail. I expect you all to know how to explain each of the factors. You all need notes on them? No, so I want to know if you all think I need notes or you want to explain. Or you just list it and we'll go through how you explain it. Right? So just list it. So the factors that affect blood pressure would be diet. And that'll be one. The next one will be exercise. Another one would be emotional or physical stress. Another one would be smoking.
After he was on his.
Smoking, yeah. So diet, exercise, stress, and smoking. Right? Okay, so for the diet, right? So your diet would affect what in particular in your diet would affect your pressure? Salt level, which affects what? So which group of food? Well, let's see it all the time. Your cholesterol, right? Your cholesterol plays a big role in your blood pressure. So food, salty foods like pizza, fried chicken, any food with large amounts of salts would increase your blood pressure, right? Because of the cholesterol in it, right? In particular, your LDLs, so low density lipoproteins. Okay. Right now, you actually have foods that could lower blood pressure, right? So if someone suffers from high blood pressure, what kind of foods you'd see them eating usually? Avocado, yeah, avocado is a good one, right? So, so think foods like cucumber, it wouldn't drop your pressure, but it would prevent it from getting high. So yeah, you can say that one as well. But foods that could actually drop blood pressure would be things like the avocado or avocado, fish, right? So what these foods have in it is something called, we have about good cholesterol. Good cholesterol is something called HDLs, high density lipoproteins. You only need to write this for the exam. But those good cholesterol helps to get rid of the bad cholesterol, regulates it. Okay? So if a question comes in the exam, how does one reduce blood pressure through diet? By the consumption of certain foods like fish, avocado, anything with good cholesterol. Right, so the next one was exercise. So how would exercise affect the blood pressure? So during exercise, what would that do to blood pressure? So when your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases. So during exercise, your blood pressure will be high, right? But what about someone who exercises regularly compared to someone who doesn't exercise as regularly? Whose resting blood pressure will be higher? Person who doesn't exercise, right? Their blood pressure and their heart rate would be high. Okay, so yes, exercise does increase blood pressure during exercise, but it lowers it in the resting phase. Okay. Right? Healthier people tend to have a lower heart rate and blood pressure. So the other one was stress. This one should be obvious. The more stressed out you are, the increase in heart rate, the increase in blood pressure. Right? If blood pressure gets too high, a blood vessel could burst, and that can lead to death or irreparable damage. That's yeah, you must stroke. Right, and the last one is smoking. Right? So the big thing with smoking, it doesn't only damage your arteries and your blood vessels, it also has nicotine in it. Right? So nicotine is a drug that makes it addictive and it also raises blood pressure. If you're raising the blood pressure, again, it's the same thing. These blood vessels can lead to a stroke, things like that. And to stay away from smoking if anyone smokes. Yeah. Right. So you all know the difference between cardiac output and blood pressure, right? Cardiac output affects blood pressure, but it's not the same thing. Right? They're linked, but not the same thing. So you're good, right? Right? Those online, you're good. Yeah. Okay. Right. So it's next subtopics going to forward. You should have some familiarity with this. Is blood vessels, right? So we went through the structure of the heart, the function of the heart, which is the output in the circulatory system, right? So now we need to go through different types of pipes, which will be blood vessels. And again, this is specifically for the mammalian circulatory system. So the main blood vessels are the arteries. The veins. And the capillaries. These are the main blood vessels. So we get it all over just for the structure. These are the three main ones. Now, the arteries and the veins, they could branch off into smaller versions of themselves, right? The smaller versions of arteries are called arterioles. The smaller versions of veins are called venules. Yes. Anybody ever read Malcolm by chance? Or read it? What is going on? People is actually on that, so it's just. I just tell you stand up as an exercise. So this guy. Okay. So this is how your the blood vessels move, right? How they link together. So we start with the arteries. You can start at any point, but it's easier to start with the arteries. So what type of blood does arteries transport throughout the body? Arteries transport oxygenated blood, right? So its job is to get the oxygen from the heart to somatic cells or body cells. So be highly concentrated oxygen. Now these arteries are big vessels. So if you try to fit an artery between tissue, it will be very difficult because of its size. So what arteries do? They branch off into arterioles. Which are smaller versions of the arteries, still transporting the oxygenated blood, or highly oxygenated blood. Now, these arterioles are also too big in certain cases. So when you need to get to single cells, so very small cells, the arterioles can't do that. So what they do then, the arterioles branch off into smaller vessels called capillaries. Now at this point, the capillaries are also carrying oxygen. Capillaries are very small. They can only transport one cell at a time. Right? So it's one cell, one red blood cell, can pass through. So the capillaries, because of their small size, they can pass the single cells. They pass on, yeah, they pass next to single cells and deliver oxygen. Right? Now after they deliver oxygen, right? It's like a switch, a tree. They deliver oxygen and they'll pick up the carbon dioxide. So some capillaries transport oxygen, while some will transport carbon dioxide. Right? Right. So then the capillaries, because they no longer oxygenated, right? They need to transport that deoxygenated blood back to. So what do they do? The capillaries branch back up and they will form venules. Right? When they get some space, they will form slightly larger structures called venules. These venules, when they get even more space, they will reform veins. Okay? And your veins will carry out the blood to the atlas. Now, water, I was about represented, but what are the structures that are trying to train? Valves. Right? For the neural energy. Right, so these are valves. And the main point of valves in veins is to prevent backflow of blood. Right, which arteries have valves. When you capillaries have valves, arteries have valves. Right, so just you don't have to color code like right? But you just take on this diagram to show arteries, arterioles, and arterioles, capillary veins, and veins. How they link together. Oh, yeah. When you venules have valves, what do you want to? Would venules have valves? Right, this how it many veins, right? Keep going. So your veins keep going against gravity. Same thing with your venules. So to prevent that backflow, put some valves. Right, the valves will be much smaller, but it would be present. or sending you all something. Right, so that's a diagram of a cross section of the three different blood vessels, right? Share it on screen. And again, it should look similar, except the labels will be a little bit different now. So you have your artery, your vein, and your capillary. Now, it's not really drawn to, yeah, it is drawn to scale actually. So of the part, we can see the capillary is much smaller, right? Right, and again, you want it to be small so it could fit in between these tissues and reach these single cells. Okay, so the cross section, if you have the blood vessel, you cut it in half and you watch it from top to bottom. Okay, so just a few changes I want to make with the labeling. Right, it's not wrong labels. It's just I want to label it a little different. Right. So this outer layer they have as the adventitia, right? No, that's not wrong, but for simplicity's sake, we're using a different way of naming it. Right, so we're going to name that part, or name we're going to use, I shouldn't say name it. The name we're going to use is the tunica externa. Right, and it's a name you'll see in most of your textbooks. Right, so we forget the adventitia part, and that outermost layer for both the vein and the artery is called the tunica externa. Right, it's simple to remember because externa means external, right, the outermost layer. So we call in that layer the tunica externa. Right, and it's not just the outer part, so we can see it properly, right? Is that entire white part that they have in the artery that we consider the tunica externa. That layer is the tunica externa. So now where they have the media, we keep in the name except we put in tunica media. Tunica media. Right, so still media meaning middle, right? And this is the middle layer of both artery and vein. We call it the tunica media. Right, and the innermost layer, right before the lumen, is called the intima or tunica intima. Again, intima, interna, the innermost layer. So those are just easier words to remember. Okay, right. So let's get into the functions of them now. So the tunica externa, right? It's made up of the extracellular matrix and the fibroblasts. Now, as the outermost layer, its main function will be protection. Right? So you're protecting the blood vessel. Remember, if a blood vessel bursts, blood would start to leak, and you don't really want that. Right? Yeah. So it'll contain elastic fibers and collagen. Now, why you want that layer to be elastic, especially in the arteries? Because of the height. Yeah, good. You want it to be elastic so you could be able to expand and contract, right? Without wasting. So good. That collagen makes it highly elastic. And you're going to find a lot of collagen in that layer. Right? So the next layer now is the tunica media. Again, it also contains elastic fibers and collagen. Now, one thing I want you all to be able to compare is this, right? How would you compare the tunica media in the artery to the vein? It's thicker, right? So why would the artery need a thicker tunica media than the vein? To pump more blood at higher pressures, right? So remember, the arteries receiving the blood from the heart. That's very, very high pressure. Okay, so it must have a higher medial layer or tunica medial layer than the vein. The vein not receiving blood from the heart, it carrying blood to the heart. So the pressure is not as high. Okay, right. And then we have the tunica intima. Now this is a smooth layer, right? It's a smooth layer. The reason it's smooth is to allow blood to flow without any resistance. And remember, if you have traction, that slows down the flow of blood and it'll be harder for transport. So your tunica intima is like cells, very smooth cells, to allow blood to transport without traction. Okay. Right. Another thing too, how would you compare the lumen in the artery compared to the vein? Which one has a bigger lumen? The vein. Now, how does that help the vein? And how does it help the artery to have a smaller lumen? So why is the small lumen of the artery advantageous? If you have a narrower area of blood to pass through, what does that do to the pressure? Increases the pressure, right? And you want that high pressure so oxygen can be quickly delivered. In the vein, you don't want high pressure, you can burst. So the wider lumen reduces the pressure. Okay? So each structure have a certain function, right? They're not just big for a certain, they're just not big for being big sick, they're not small for being small sick. It have a reason. And again, the valve is to prevent backflow. Right? And we didn't go through the capillary as yet. So the capillary, remember, is only one cell thick. It's about 0.7 micrometers in diameter. Right? Only one cell could pass through at the time. It has a very thin, like very, very thin layer outside the lumen. Right? And yeah. Right? So the endothelium or the outermost layer is very small. So it cannot withstand high pressures. So if the first thing to burst will be a capillary or some capillaries. Right? Very thin, the main function, transport of red blood cells. Right, so you all can print this, or if you'll actually let me send you some options. So you all can just choose one and print it. Right, you can print it, you can draw it. Ideally, drawing would be good. But I know you all. Right, so you have to be able to label and annotate these diagrams. You can bring it in the exam and ask you to label. They can bring it, label and ask you the function, or they can bring it, tell you to label and give the function. And they can also bring it and ask you why this artery so much thicker than the vein, why the medial layer is so much thicker, and you have to be able to provide an answer. And so either one is good. The only thing that missing in the second diagram is the valves, right? And I wanted to include the valves. And better have a description of the layers that the first diagram do have. Okay. So next class we'll actually take the note for arteries, veins, and capillaries, right? Like what they do, and we'll finish up with circulation. So we have to go through that. We have to go through different types of cells. So you have your red blood cells, the white blood cells, your lymphocytes, the phagocytes. We have to go through that. And we also have to go through the Bohr effect, right? Which is also known as the oxygen shift. And then we'll be done with circulation. Sites. Model sites.
Yeah.
Right, so if you want to read up on that before the next class, you could. Anybody have any questions from today? Online, you don't have any questions? Okay. Right, so that's it for today. I'll see you all.